reason, it's been easy to forget how bad Kamala Harris is, but I'm here to remind you. President Joe Biden dropped out of the 2024 presidential race amid concern from fellow Democrats that he stood no chance of beating Donald Trump this go around. I believe it is in the best interest of my party and the country for me to stand down, Biden posted on X before shortly after throwing his full support and endorsement behind Vice President Kamala Harris becoming the party's new nominee. Democrats, it's time to come together and beat Trump, Biden added, let's do this. But can Harris do this? It's hard to conclude that Harris would far worse than Biden, whose cognitive difficulties were so apparent his own party came to view him as a serious electoral liability. Yet if one recalls Harris' own ill-fated run at the Democratic nomination in 2020 and her time in politics before then, the math in this equation becomes somewhat fuzzier. Harris was a truly bad candidate, and prior to that, she perpetuated some truly bad policies. Kamala Harris is a horrible campaigner, and Kamala Harris, the cop, can be an easy target, can be easy to forget if you are only considering what Harris has done lately. Her tenure as vice president has been almost entirely unremarkable. The most distinguishing feature has been a series of bizarre but benign word salads, and political memory is short. So Harris isn't the best orator, surely that's surmountable. Besides, the lack of distinguishing actions during her vice presidency could even be to her advantage. She's basically a blank slate, at least if you don't look back too far. But what if you do look back? The first thing you'll see is Harris's shambolic 2020 campaign for president. She wouldn't commit to policy positions. She couldn't defend her past actions. There were ongoing stories about her poor treatment of her staff. She entered the race as a top-tier candidate with glowing press and some big-time backers, and dropped out 2 months later before the Iowa caucuses, polling at just 3% nationally. She wasn't even polling as a top-tier candidate in her home state of California. It was impossible in that campaign to ascertain what Harris stood for. This wasn't just a case of national campaigning jitters. One major thread in Harris's career, including during her days as District Attorney of San Francisco and Attorney General of California, has been flip-flopping on issues to suit her audience or the political moment. This may have worked as a short-term strategy, but it left a long-term impression of her as a rudderless and ruthless, a phony. It will be incredibly easy for Republicans to portray her as someone who stands for nothing, or as whatever it is they think you'll hate most, like a representative of California socialism. The image of Harris as slippery, all ambition, no ideology may contribute to her unpopularity among American voters. It's almost certainly more of a liability than the once common critique that Harris was an overzealous cop and drug warrior. Harris's tough-on-crime past makes her unpopular among leftists, and more radical wings of the Democratic Party, as well as among civil libertarians and criminal justice reformers. There's no doubt that this has become back to haunt her again. She would become the Democratic nominee. But this past may have been especially hurtful in 2020, when the protests inspired by George Floyd's death were still raging and the criminal justice reform momentum was still vibrant. Remember to defund the police? And it likely mattered more in a Democratic primary than it would in a general election, since the types that find fault with Harris's prosecutorial record are unlikely to find Trump and Republicans a more welcome alternative. If anything, some of the lip service Harris paid to progressive justice ideals, both in 2020 and in California, may be used by Republicans to help turn safety-minded independents against her. That means Harris's turnabouts on justice issues, not her actual record, may wind up harming her the most. It leaves her vulnerable to attacks from both left and the right on this front, to allegations that she's been both too aggressive and too lenient on crime, even if only one of these has been born out of just words. I won't pretend to know whether Harris would be a better or worse choice for Democrats than some other potential candidates. I don't know whether she could beat Trump, though I have my doubts. What I do know is that Harris becomes the party's nominee. The rush to anoint her a saint in the press, on social media, among celebrities is going to kick into overdrive, both because of her identity and out of a desperation to avoid Trump getting elected again. But as much as I want to see a female president sooner rather than later, and as much as I do not want to see another Trump presidency, I can't pretend Harris doesn't have serious and worrying flaws. As much as she's been a pretty benign figure during her vice presidential days, there's nothing to stop her worst tendencies from flaring up again if she becomes president. These tendencies include a penchant for saying one thing during campaigns and then doing the opposite, of using the state to crack down on problems like truancy and drug use that many would agree could be better solved through non-punitive approaches, and of using moral panics around sex in self-serving ways, even while publicly ignoring sexual misconduct among California cops. They include acting cavalierly toward the Constitution, defending dirty prosecutors, and finding new ways for the government to poke into people's lives. Remember, not only Harris helped put the parents of truant kids in jail, but she wrote in her 2019 book that the truth that we hold, instituting a statewide plan on truancy, was part of the reason I'd run for the office in the first place. That is who Kamala Harris is, though she claims the jailing was unintended. Those who critique Harris for being something of a politically ambitious cipher aren't wrong, but this image is incomplete. There are other things Harris has stood for consistently, and none of them are good. I'll leave you with something I wrote about Harris back in 2019. During her 28-year tenure as a county prosecutor, district attorney, and state attorney general in the public eye, she spoke of racial justice and liberal values, bolstering her cred as one of the Democratic Party's rising stars. But behind closed doors, she repeatedly fought for a more aggressive prosecution, not just of violent criminals, but of people who committed misdemeanors and quality of life crimes. Every attorney general fights for state power and police prerogatives. It's part of the job. But over and over again, Harris went beyond the call of duty, fighting for harsher sentences, larger bail requirements, longer prison terms, more prosecution of petty crimes, greater criminal justice involvement in low-income and minority communities, less due process for people in the system, less transparency, and less accountability for bad cops. In the early days of her 2020 presidential campaign, Harris sought to define herself as a liberal reformer who has kept up with the times. But a review of her career shows a distinct penchant for power, seeking an illiberal disposition in which no offense is small or harmless enough to warrant lenience from the state. Now she wants to bring that approach to the highest office in the land. Whoever Harris pretends to be this time, she cannot be, to use one popular Harris phrase, unburdened by what has been. This article is from 2019. It is from E&E Politico, Kamala Harris and her connection to inmate firefighters. As California Attorney General, Kamala Harris led a team that fought to keep more people in prison so they could fight wildfires. She said later that she was unaware of the effort. It began when federal courts ruled that California prisons were overcrowded. State attorneys in Harris's office said releasing low-level offenders more quickly would deplete a workforce that California relies to suppress wildfires. Harris later reversed that position, saying her staff attorneys had made the argument without her knowledge. Now, in her bid for the White House, Harris, a Democratic senator, has pitched a different approach for the country. She endorses mobilizing a massive response to climate change through the Green New Deal, especially for fighting bigger, more dangerous fires brought by rising temperatures. Harris's support for the Green New Deal and for prison labor are two answers to the same question. Who will do the extra work that climate change brings? California and many other states have for decades relied on low-wage convicts to pad out their fire crews, but activists who want the government to support well-paying green jobs as well as bipartisan efforts to reform criminal justice are challenging that system. The state of California has come to rely on prison labor to such a degree that it has affected state policy, said David Fathi, director of the National Prison Project for the American Civil Liberties Union. Harris, whose campaign did not respond to questions, has made wildfires a central element of her policy pitch on climate change. In the June presidential debates, she recalled meeting firefighters who left their own burning homes to battle blazes, calling it a critical issue, saying we must not confront what is immediate and before us right now. That is why I support a Green New Deal, she said. It is also the reason her office defended prison labor. In 2014, California had too many people in its prisons and too many dead trees around its towns. Both were coming to a head. The Supreme Court had upheld in a ruling that California violated the Constitution by imprisoning almost double the amount of people its facilities were designed to hold. Harris's office was in court arguing over what to do about it. At the same time, California was coming off a drought, and the winds were strong. It was perfect fire weather. Thousands of blazes spread across the strait, scrambling firefighters for a season that seemed unprecedented. Scientists blamed climate change for exuberating the problem, and they warned that the future would be worse. For decades, California has taken a two-birds-with-one-stone approach to these problems. It has trained about 2,600 prisoners to deploy alongside professional firefighters and do much of the same work for about $1 an hour. The fuck? While critics have compared that to slave labor, California said it's vital to fire suppression. Prisoners have at times accounted for about a third of the state's firefighting force. Men, women, and juvenile inmates live in more than 40 fire camps nestled around every corner of the state. During blazes, they cut fire breaks and light prescribed burns, the same kind of work as professional firefighters, only they wear orange uniforms instead of yellow California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection. The work is hard and dangerous, but life in the camps is more relaxed than in the prison yard. Visitors can spend the night, and some camps have board games and barbecues. At least one has a children's playground. Alcohol is banned, but outside food is not. I've seen a ton of families take pre-made meals like pasta, salad, soups, all kinds of meats, carne asada, hot dogs, burgers. They take juice containers, a pack of soda, stuff to make their own sandwiches with. A woman wrote last year on the forum for prisoners, friends, and family. As long as you pack for a picnic, you'll be fine, she advised other visitors. The prisoners also get another perk, 2 days credit toward their sentences for every day working at the fire camp. That contribution to early release caught the attention of the 3-judge panel supervising California's crowded prisons. The state agreed to expand its work program to more minimum security inmates, not just the ones volunteering to fight wildfires. The court gave the state some wiggle room, but progress was slow. Eventually, civil rights advocates urged the courts to deliver an ultimatum. 1 day of work would shorten prison sentences 2 days. That's when Harris's office raised the alarm. California couldn't afford to lose the cheap prison labor, it argued. Extending 2-for-1 credits to all minimum custody inmates at this time would severely impact fire camp participation, a dangerous outcome while California is in the middle of a difficult fire season and severe drought, the Attorney General's office said in a September 30th, 2014 court filing. Releasing more minimum security inmates, what the state called higher turnover, would create vacancies for trash collecting, cleaning, and other critical jobs, Harris's office said. Those jobs would then be filled by inmates who might otherwise have volunteered for the harder, more dangerous work of firefighting. As a result, according to Harris's office, California would be forced to draw upon its fire camp population to fill these vital positions. The legal argument carried Harris's name, though it was signed by one of her top lieutenants, Patrick McKinney. He later became chief counsel for the state prison system and is now a judge on the Alameda County Superior Court. The court was skeptical, and after the Los Angeles Times published the state's arguments, Harris walked it back. I would be very candid with you, because I saw that article this morning and I was shocked, and I'm looking into it to see if the way it was characterized in the paper is actually how it occurred in court, Harris told BuzzFeed News. I was very troubled by what I read. I just need to find out what we did actually say in court, she said. One thing was made clear by her office's position. California is struggling to manage its fires. Flames climb up a wall of family photos as firefighters rush around, smoke billows around a rooftop, then the voiceover starts. California's State Firefighters Union aired ads this summer in Sacramento warning that wildfire risk was growing, a not-so-subtle message that the state needs more firefighters to keep up with the longer fire seasons. We've had extreme and unusual fire seasons over the last couple of years, Tim Edwards, president of CAL FIRE, Local 2881, said in the ad, and our firefighters are working long shifts to respond to these devastating emergencies. California Governor Gavin Newsom earlier this year announced that the state would hire almost 400 additional firefighters this season, bringing the force up to about 6,000. The state also has more 100 National Guardsmen tapped for firefighting. But this is still not enough, according to the union. Staffing is still below levels in 1975, when fire conditions were generally milder than today, and the warnings of Harris's office has been somewhat validated, according to officials. Fire camp participation is down. CAL FIRE says it's working hard to recruit inmates, while the firefighters union worries about drawing on prisoners with violent histories. With the release program and us trying to hold off allowing higher risk inmates, it's a huge hit, Edwards, the union president, said in an interview. Most fire camps are down at least one crew, which is about 15 inmate fighters, he said. Skeptics of using prisoners, also known as con crews, note that their cheap labor offsets other parts of the CAL FIRE budget. Part of the reason that they pay CAL FIRE captains so well is because they're paying the con crews $1 an hour, said Tim Inglesby, a former firefighter who's now an executive director of Firefighters Union for Safety, Ethics, and Ecology. The California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation didn't respond to questions about the program, but a spokesman told Capital Weekly last year that inmate firefighters save the state up to $100 million a year. Prisoners deserve the chance to learn firefighting skills and help their community, Inglesby said. but their exploitative conditions and their limited options for continuing to work as firefighters after release point to the current system's problems, he said, but it could also offer an opportunity. Reducing wildfire risk will take a lot of work, and the greatest need is in rural areas where young people are fleeing for the lack of jobs. California does have a civilian conservation corps. Hard work, low pay, miserable conditions, and more, its website says, that Newsom has proposed expanding. The model could get supercharged under plans from Democratic presidential candidates like New Jersey Senator Cory Booker and Washington Governor Jay Inslee that would create thousands of jobs restoring forests. There's so much work that needs to be done, and how are you going to find the workforce for that? Well, it's standing by, get the right policies and the right funding and make it happen, he said. I don't know, you could just pay people to fight the fires instead of using prison labor. Seems like the right thing to do. Thanks for watching.